I'll close the third information ecosystems lecture by talking about phenomena that fall into a sort of gray area between pro-social and anti-social pressures. The first thing we'll want to look at is sponsored content. But let's talk a little bit about the general definition of these gray areas. So, obstacles to free and transparent flow of information often find their motivation in the desire for power or for control. And this certainly is the motivation behind a lot of disinformation, propaganda, and censorship. But just as often, unchecked monetary motivations drive similar practices, which, though usually more irritations or, minor impingements on one's life, have potential for more serious abuses. Commercial interests, as well as sophisticated marketing and data mining, in fact, increasingly shape the internet itself and what we see and how the internet appears to each of us individually. Unlike the deliberately malicious techniques that we discussed in the tripartite of despotism, these phenomena live primarily in this gray area. They have some positive or redeeming values, and they have some negative or undesirable effects. Sponsored content occurs when advertisers create messages that are designed to look like news or information in a particular medium. Advertisers then purchase time or space to run that sponsored content intermixed within the articles, the videos, and so on. There are norms about how this gets presented in the United States, for example. Sponsored content is usually identified as such, but how easy it is to see whether or not the content is sponsored is another story. So if you've ever clicked on a link and suddenly got the feeling that this wasn't really an article, but more like an advertisement, or if you're watching a talk show late at night and then realize that it was really an information or infomercial rather, then you've seen how sometimes it's difficult to identify sponsored content. Similarly, magazines will intersperse advertisements with articles in a way that makes it sort of difficult to determine whether or not the article is an advertisement or not. And in this way, this breakdown or potential breakdown between what's being represented as fact and what's being represented as messages can have potentially negative effects. The next phenomenon that we want to look at is called product placement. Now, product placement is sort of like sponsored content, but with product placement, advertisers use products that they embed or put into films or television, music videos, sporting events, magazines, video games, even books. And so product placement is also sometimes called embedded marketing. To count as product placement, the creators of the content must intend the appearances of those products to serve a promotional purpose and not to include the product as part of the movie's or the story's cultural milieu, the atmosphere of the movie itself. So both sponsored conduct and product placement are mechanisms that have been around for a long time, but they've become increasingly common in part because of sophisticated techniques for people's avoiding advertisements when they're consuming films, televisions, sporting goods, or sporting events, magazines, and so on. So, for instance, there are ad blockers that block a lot of the advertising on internet pages. And there are DVRs now that will filter out commercials that are running on a show that you're recording. And so because of this, advertisers want a way to get their message into what you're consuming in a way that gets by these filters that we've developed. And, These filters are sophisticated and new, but we've had filters like this for a long time. People will just get up and do something else during a commercial, or they switch channels and try and watch something else during a commercial, and so on. These just automate that process in a way and allow for consumers to avoid ads just a little bit easier. So product placement and sponsored content then try and get around these hurdles and put the products in a position where people will consume that advertisement or that messaging without necessarily even realizing that they're consuming it. And one of the interesting things about product placement is that it really does affect even whether or not people are going to watch an ad for that product that's been placed when you have that commercial break, or whether they'll avoid watching an ad, or they're more likely rather to avoid watching an ad for the competitive product after that product placement. I've got a little video to show you from Bloomberg News about product placement. And I think the disturbing aspect of this is just how excited the spokesperson is here for the whole idea that Man of Steel had the highest value of product placement of any movie yet produced at that time.
Warner Brothers' latest installment of Superman is not just giving comic fans a superhero fix, it's also giving brands looking for a little lift, a cape to latch onto. While the Man of Steel cost around $225 million to make, it's raked in more than $160 million before a single ticket has been sold, and that's thanks to more than 100 promotional tie-ins. And each of these partners is competing to be in the spotlight in the summer's biggest blockbuster, none more so than these three brands. Take, for instance, Clark Kent's most important accessory, those iconic black eyeglasses. They'll get a hip new upgrade from eyeglass upstart Warby Parker. The e-commerce site has created a line of exclusive frames inspired by the film, with a $95 price tag. It's a giant stage for a company that's just 3 years old and boasts only 113 employees. A surprise of a different sort? While Sears is on the ropes, they're fighting back, and they've scored a major hit. Superman's mother is a Sears employee, and real-life employees were so excited about the tie-in that they gathered at the Chicago headquarters to set the world record for the most amount of people dressed as Superman in one place. And while the phone booth disappeared a while ago, it seems like Nokia did too, which explains why the mobile manufacturer is going big as the film's largest global partner. Nokia timed the Chinese launch of the Lumia 925 to the Man of Steel's debut. The cost of Superman's phone? A whopping $700.
Excuse me.